It's time for dumplings. All right, so just a little bit of plain flour. And for all you guys that find that dumpling wrappers are hard to find in your local supermarket, this is a great technique to learn, and you will be making dumplings at home in no time. All right, so I'm just gonna pour in a little bit of hot water. Now, I boiled the water, let it rest for a couple of minutes, so it's still hot but not boiling. Pour that into your flour, start mixing that through from the center. And now once I can start to see this getting a little bit clumpy, it's a very technical term, clumpy, I will just take out my wooden spoon and get my hands in there. So just keep moving and pushing this around until that dough comes together cleanly off the bottom of the bowl. Okay, now once we get to about this stage where I can see most of that flour has been incorporated, I'm going to take that out onto a bench, and I just want a little bit more flour on here so we don't get anything sticking. Okay, and you just want to knead this for about 5 minutes, and there's nothing special about the kneading technique. Just use the heel of your palm, push into the dough, and then keep turning the dough over, and it's just like a turn and smush, turn and smush. Now you really want to let your fingers tell you what is going on with this dough, and as I'm kneading it I can feel it get just a little bit sticky on the edges of my fingers. So I'm just going to sprinkle over just a little bit more flour and keep kneading. Now we get to the point where our dough looks really nice and smooth, and I can feel that it's really firmed up from when we first started kneading. And if I push down on that dough, it's so tight that it bounces straight back up. Now at this point we're ready to let the dough rest. So I want to do that in a sealable bag. Seal that up, and then because that dough is still slightly warm, it's going to steam a little bit in that bag and soften up, and we want to let that rest for about 15 or 20 minutes. Now let's have a look and see what state our dough is in. Now it's gotten beautifully soft, and the easiest way to divide this up is to just get a little bit of flour on there and make a hole in the center, like you're going to make a bagel or something like that. And then just work your fingers and your palms around to make an even ring of dough. Now the whole point of what we're doing here is we're trying to get the dough into perfectly even little pieces. Okay, so we have our ring, and then I'm just going to slice that in half, and 2 even logs is what we have now, and I just want to roll one of those pieces out. I'm going to keep that other piece underneath some plastic because I don't want it to dry out. Okay, and now you can cut your log into even little pieces. Now if you want to be pedantic, each of these little pieces should be around 9 or 10 grams. I find that's the ideal weight for a dumpling wrapper. Now take one of those pieces and put the rest under the plastic with the remaining dough. And the technique here is pretty simple. I like to just get a little bit of flour on that piece of dough and get myself a good shape to start with. So, I mean, there's lots of little special dumpling wooden rolling pins that you can get and all those sorts of things. I find that unless you're like the awesome Din Tai Fung guy, the smaller rolling pins just seem to not work for my hands. I like to have a good grip on what I'm rolling with, and so plastic cup seems to be the best thing for me. And I just roll that out until I've got a nice sort of vaguely circular shape. And now what you want is you want the center part of the dumpling wrapper to be thicker than the outer part, because the outer edges, that's where you're going to start folding and pleating. So you want those parts to be a little bit thinner. And that's why it's easy to use this cup, because I can hold the dough, push the edges out with my cup, and just keep flipping the dough around. And now you can see I've got a thicker base in the center of my dumpling wrapper, and the outside edges are really fine and thin. So when I go to fold, I'm going to get a much better texture for my dumpling. Now pop that onto a plate or a tray and then keep on going. Now the key to storing and stacking these, so don't put too many on top of each other because the heavy weight of the wrappers tends to make them stick together. Make sure you've got plenty of flour in between each of your wrappers, and then once you've got them all rolled out, you can use them straight away or pile them into little resealable bags. Again, don't stack them too high, and then pop them into the freezer, and then you've got them ready for whenever you need them. Just 30 minutes to an hour defrosting outside of the freezer is plenty of time to give those for when you want to use them. All right, let's get started on the filling part first of all. Now for me, this dumpling really depends on two things. One is the beautiful pure flavor of the prawns, and the other thing is the kind of crunchy element we're going to add, and that is with the water chestnuts. So you can find water chestnuts in a can. They're perfectly fine to use canned. I'm lucky here in Thailand I can find them fresh. Now you just want to fine dice on these. And now we want some really nice, beautiful herbs here. So I'm going to use some coriander and some spring onion. Now for me, texture and chopping here is really important. So if your spring onion is really quite large, you're going to want to thin it out through the stem here. Mine's not too bad, but I know you can get some uber big ones that are almost like leeks. Make sure you get a really nice fine chop. And now some really simple aromatics here. I just want some ginger. And some garlic. And now come the prawns. Now you don't need a big cleaver here like I have. It is more fun with a cleaver, but a regular knife is just fine. Just make sure you're chopping into nice fine pieces. So you could totally do this in a food processor. What I find though is that when you hand chop your prawns, and I know it's a little bit of extra work, but it's really worth it because you get just the right amount of pop and bounce and texture, and you get some nice little chunks of prawn in there as well. But who am I to judge, guys? If you want to do the food processor way, totally go ahead and do it. Now the key to getting a really fine chop here is to kind of go ahead and do some chopping and then fold the prawn meat over and then go back in the opposite direction. Okay, so this is the kind of texture that you're looking for. And pop that into your bowl. Now to bind all of this together, I'm going to add an egg white, and the egg white only here because I don't want to add any extra flavoring with the yolk. I want to keep this as cleanly prawny and a little bit herby as possible. I'm sure prawny is a word. Maybe. Now, a good pinch of salt here. And then just a little dash of white pepper. White pepper because it has a more milder kind of flavor than a very harsh in-your-face black pepper. And now just give everything a mix. Now you want to give this a really good kind of beating almost, and you'll notice that everything starts to become a bit stickier as you're going, and that means that the egg white is binding everything together and firming up all the proteins in there, and we're going to get a nice bouncy dumpling filling. So with the wrapping, I'm going to keep it really simple. See, I don't ask too much. A lot of chopping, but simple wrapping. There you go. Okay, so grab yourself a wrapper. I'm using some gyoza wrappers today, and you just want some filling in the middle. And now here is one super important tip for when you're using store-bought wrappers. They're often quite dry and they need way more water than you think to get everything to stick together. So get a lot of water on that edge there. And now I like to just do 2 pleats on one side at the top here, push that together, and then use your fingers to kind of seal that edge. So we've got a couple of pleats on one side and then smooth on the other side. And to be honest, this is going to all wrinkle up once we get it into the water anyway, so you don't have to be too pedantic here. I'm just waiting for my water to come up to a boil so I can cook my dumplings. So in the meantime, let's make our dipping sauce. Very simple, I just need some soy sauce. And then for me, what sets apart a really good dumpling dipping sauce is dumpling dipping sauce. It's a mouthful. What sets it apart from a good and a bad one to me is the addition of vinegar. So if you can get a hold of this Chinese black vinegar, that is going to give you the most beautiful, it's almost like a red wine vinegar sort of flavor. So if you can't get the black vinegar, feel free to add a little bit of red wine vinegar instead. And I just want a good, about equal amount soy sauce and vinegar for my liking. And then for me, it's got to be red oil dipping sauce. Red oil meaning chili oil, and so many of you guys have made my Szechuan chili oil. I know you all love it. If you haven't given it a try, check out my video on YouTube on how to make it. This is what it looks like. It has loads of different spices in there, and you can use the store-bought chili oil, of course. So make sure you're getting a mixture of chili flakes and the chili oil in there. And then to kind of round out the flavors, you really want a little dash of sugar here. You won't notice the sweetness, but it will give the dipping sauce a really beautiful, balanced kind of flavor. And then a little smattering of grated garlic for some extra kick at the end. Now my water's ready to go. It's simmering, but you don't want it really rapidly boiling too much because you can run the risk of your dumplings breaking apart. So I just want a nice gentle bath for my dumplings here. And you want to cook these for about 5 or 6 minutes, or until the dumpling wrapper becomes nice and frilly and you can just see a little bit of that pink prawn kind of popping through the wrapper. All right, now these are looking ready to go, which is good news because that means I get to try them soon. All right, just give them a drain, pop them into a bowl. I like to go kind of elegant, a little bit fancy schmancy with these ones. So I just put a little serving of dumplings in here. Some of that dipping sauce drizzled on top. Kind of want to make sure you're going to get a really good mouthful of that dipping sauce, so be generous. And then just a little smattering of spring onion. And there you go. I mean, bowls of dumplings don't get much better than that. Oh, look at how pretty that is. Let's just make sure that I've done a good job for you guys. If you have a look at that filling in there, it's just beautifully simple with the prawn, just flecks of those herbs. But the texture that you get, so you get that crunch from the water chestnut and those little hits of flavor from the spring onion, from the coriander and the garlic and ginger. And then you get the vinegar and the chili oil and the soy sauce, and it really is quite the symphony. Beautiful. I mean, we make a lot of dumplings. This really simple version, can't be beat. Yum. We're going to start off with some garlic chives. So let's talk through the garlic chives. This is what they look like, and they add a really distinct flavor, kind of a mix between garlic and spring onion. So you can see these have a very flat leaf compared to the spring onion, which is round. So you want to find these guys at your Asian grocer. If you can't get a hold of them, just use spring onion, but just add a little bit of grated garlic in there as well. Really worth seeking them out though. All right, so I just want some small little slices of these. Now for the pork mince, try to get a fattier version of pork mince. If you go with a really lean one, it won't be as juicy or as soft and tender. So add your garlic chives to the pork. And to that we want to add some sesame oil. And then now we need to work on the filling texture. So this kind of Northern Chinese style dumpling to me is a little bit more robust, a bit chunkier, thicker, sturdier than your delicate Din Tai Fung kind of situation, if that makes sense. But we still want quite a bit of liquid in here because we want to make sure that our filling is nice and juicy. So we need to add some chicken stock. I'm going to add an egg as well. And then to give us the right kind of pop or firm texture with the filling, I'm going to add a little bit of corn flour as well. And then we want a really decent pinch of salt in here. The salt's going to help with the texture as well as the flavor. And then here's another tip for the filling. You want to mix this vigorously for at least 2 or 3 minutes until your arm feels like it's actually going to fall off. Not quite like that, but you get the picture. So you can see this is starting to come together. It's very sticky. Okay, so this is the situation that you're looking for. It's almost like a thick cake batter kind of texture. Okay, so now we're ready to fold our dumplings. And I'm using some homemade dumpling wrappers here. You can find the video on how to make these on my YouTube channel. If you're interested, you can also use gyoza wrappers from your Asian grocery store. Basically, you're looking for a wheat flour based round wrapper. Okay, so you want to have quite a bit of filling in here. I want quite a chunky dumpling. And then if you're using store-bought wrappers, you're definitely going to need to do this. If you're using homemade ones, probably not because they're a bit more moist. But just grab a little bit of water and just moisten the edges. Fold the top over and then kind of fold and then pinch the sides in. Do the same on the other side and then pinch everything together really firmly at the top. Now I gotta say that even though it's a bit more of a pain to make your own dumpling wrappers, it actually makes the folding process a lot easier. I find that when I do this kind of shape dumpling with a store-bought wrapper, because they're a lot drier, it tends to crack and more easily sort of fall apart. So if you're having trouble with your store-bought wrapper, just do a simple fold over, don't worry about the pleating. Look at these little guys, look how cute they are. Oh, I get so excited about dumplings. Okay, so let's do dumpling sauce before we cook the dumplings. I'm going to start off with some soy sauce and some vinegar. So I'm just using plain white distilled vinegar here. Now the traditional vinegar would be to use a Chinese black vinegar. It's really hard to get a hold of where I am, so I just use this one instead. But obviously if you can find it, you should add that one. And then this special guy over here, this is my homemade chili oil. You'll see how large the jar is because I just can't get enough of this stuff. You can find a video on how to make this on my YouTube channel. A lot of you guys have made it. I know you love it, which is awesome. But you can use any kind of chili oil you like. The key here is that this homemade one has heaps of beautiful spices in here, star anise, Szechuan peppercorns, cinnamon. And the key to using a chili oil like this is to make sure you're getting both like the chili powder sediment part as well as the oil itself. So if you have a look, when I take my spoon out, you can see lots of little spices and chili bits in there, not just oil. Now I like mine kind of fiery hot, so I'm going to add quite a bit of this, but totally up to you how much you want to add. And to that I'm going to add a little bit of garlic, and I'm just going to grate that in. Oh, this dish packs so much punch with the chili and the pork and the garlic, but we're also going to add some spring onion as well. Just give that a mix. Oh, that's got some kick. So because our dumplings are so chunky and robust, they're going to take a little bit more technique to cook the filling perfectly, plus keep that wrapper the perfect texture as well. I'm going to show you how we do that. You need to start off with some rapidly boiling water, lots of it, and then I also want you to keep on hand some really cold water. You need 2 of those things. Now, dumplings go into the hot water first. And just while that water's coming back up to the boil, make sure you're gently agitating those dumplings, making sure that they're not sticking together or sticking to the bottom of the pan. Now what we're waiting for here are for these dumplings to just start to float up to the surface. So when you can see your dumplings start to float, they're going to pop up to the top of the water like this. Now I want you to add the cold water. Just a little splash, half a cup or so. So this is going to slow down the cooking process, and the whole point of that is that if we left them to boil for long enough so that big chunky bit of filling cooks through, then we run the risk of the wrapper on the outside overcooking and sort of disintegrating. So that is why we want to add the cold water. Now I'm going to let the water come back up to a boil again, and then I'm going to add more cold water, let the water come back to a boil, and by then our dumpling filling should be perfectly cooked. All right, so these are looking good to me. I'm gonna get them straight out into a bowl. And now, of course, we want a beautiful bath of that amazing spicy dumpling sauce. And doesn't that just look like a little bowl of heaven? My goodness. Okay, let's have a look inside and see what our dumpling filling looks like. Oh, look at that, perfect. Just with a beautiful whisper of that chili oil. The porkiness of that is so amazing, and the garlic chives, you can taste everything in there, every little element in there, beautifully shining through, and the texture, everything. Ah, so good. Spicy. I think this is like the happiest I've ever been in my life.